Afternoon, all. Hope you can hear me all right. Hope we're back. I've actually turned my soundboard on this morning, so I don't do 5 minutes without any sound. That was a criticism from yesterday. Apologies. We managed to tidy that up, and many thanks to Anna Maria, who saved the day and came on and told us a little bit about the Massage Matters podcast, which is exciting news from yesterday. That's gone down a storm. Today, we've got some guests, which I'm going to be introducing very soon. We're going to be talking about all things education, particularly clinical education, placements. You can imagine the disruption. If you might be in a situation where you've not really thought in that direction. Lots of people have had a lot of things on, but you can imagine the disruption that's occurred with regards to getting placements and clinical education generally. The delivery of it's been disrupted, but also then it's given an opportunity for some real innovations and entrepreneurship that can really occur in these moments. As we all know, it can really upturn the apple cart, but then also some real decent stuff can emerge from this challenge. So really delighted to be joined by Jane Ashbrook and Sophie Taylor today to talk a little bit about that. They're fairly local to me at MMU, coincidentally, but I know of them from their work, not just locally, but also broadly, wanting to bring this conversation forward. And there's lots of things that can be translated, no doubt. And as we've talked about before many times, not just on this show, but beyond, consistency is key here. Like the best ideas need to be translated where possible nationally so that we decrease. We'd all be guilty of making postcode lotteries otherwise, and being critical of those things is sensible and certainly central to what we want to do. Is get the best ideas need to win out and be translated where possible. And so thanks to them for sharing. So without further ado, let me try and bring them in. This is where technical glitches can sometimes occur, but hopefully I will be joined by Jane and Sophie. Can you both hear me okay?
Yeah. Loud and clear.
Lovely.
Hello.
Right. Well, Jane, let's get stuck in first then, because we've known each other a while and worked together on various things, namely MSKR stuff. But you'd mentioned that this was something worth chatting about. Of course, I was always going to agree with that. Very passionate about education. But what was it that was at the heart of what's going on at the moment that made you feel it was worth us discussing publicly?
Okay, well, I think predominantly really is the challenges of in March, all of our placement provision was stopped. So we had a lot of students out on placement or due to go out on placement. But then because of the things with COVID, a lot of those students then lost their placement. So obviously Health Education England brought in a portal whereby our third year placements could apply for band 3 jobs and count some of those hours towards clinical placement. Sophie will have to interrupt me if I start talking rubbish because she knows a little bit more about the details than me. But then we're faced with the situation coming into September where most of our students who were in second year last year, so our new incoming third years, have lost at least one whole clinical placement. Some have lost more than one and some haven't. Well, I think most of them have had one. So there's a lot of hours down. So we're kind of faced with a situation now where we've got to catch up on lost hours. Plus we're still trying to provide placements for the students that are due to go out onto placement. So our third years that have had placements are still due to go out and second years due to go out. So, and obviously we're in a situation whereby there's a number of universities all around the Northwest that are in the same situation. So then it ends up with a lot of students that are significantly down on the hours that they would normally be at this point. And really, I think Health Education England and lots of the Northwest kind of organisations and teams and stakeholders have worked so hard to come together to try and provide as many placements as possible, and we're in an okay place. Like we're getting there so far, aren't we? We're managing to catch up, and people have been so supportive, particularly the NHS placements have been really, really supportive. But obviously people have challenges in clinical practice. Maybe they're redeployed to a different area that's not their area of expertise and they don't feel confident to have students, or thinking about risk assessments and students that might be in a higher risk category. It might not be appropriate for them to go out onto placement and potentially come into contact with patients and staff. And then it's the whole PPE thing. A lot of our students go out on placement in community services. So obviously a lot of the students don't have their own car. So then you've got to consider car sharing and PPE and going into patients' houses. There's just a big minefield of things that we're trying to navigate while having more students kind of come into the university
and trying to progress the student's journey through the course. Can I just interject there, Jane? Jane's obviously alluded to the fact that many placements stopped at the start of the pandemic. but some placements did keep going. And can I just thank all our colleagues, both in the NHS, in private practice, across the whole spectrum of placement providers. They have been absolutely incredible. They really have. The innovation, the commitment to our students has been absolutely phenomenal, and we're so grateful for that, and I know our students are as well. It's been a really tough time for everybody in clinical practice, and for our students, and the tenacity and patience and willingness to be flexible and innovate and think laterally about this has been incredible. So I just think we're very, very grateful. I want to say a big thank you to all our clinical colleagues for doing that for our students.
No, that's brilliant. I'm pleased to hear there's been some real help that's stepped up there. I've been hearing stories such as that across the country and beyond. So that's great. I think we best start with some examples really as to what innovations we're talking about and what sort of lateral thinking that we want to be encouraging or getting people to think outside the box, to use a cliche. So what sort of springs to mind when I suggest that?
Sophie's got a list. I'm going to say I'll leave that one to you. So.
Okay then. Well, just some examples. For example, students who stayed with their colleagues in the NHS, it may well have been that those clinical colleagues were redeployed to areas that were different than their usual area of practice, and they kept the student with them. They had to adapt their practice. They were going into areas and situations and circumstances that they had never really encountered before, and they kept the student with them, and the student went on the journey with them. They had to learn about donning and doffing and infection control and different ways of working. So I think that just showed a lot of courage and bravery and willingness to take a balanced risk. But then we've had a colleague from I suppose I can name them, from Salford Royal, the director of therapies there, clinical director and consultant physiotherapist, who probably in her normal practice would not take students on placement, but she offered placement so students could witness a leader, a senior manager working. They did projects, they worked alongside her. They also spent some time in the virtual fracture clinic as well. So that was a real example of innovation. We've yet to pilot this yet, but our professor of education within the university is going to offer a placement for our students as well, maybe some project-based working. Another example was, again, within the University Manchester Movement Unit, which is a clinic that is set up within the campus. We had one of our students who lived remotely from Manchester in a long way away in the northeast, who had for various circumstances been unable to complete their placement journey, and we attached them to the movement unit, and they offered, he undertook a lot of projects, did work, he learned about the running of the clinic, he learned about the governance of running a private clinic, about managing a clinic. But also, one of his pieces of work was undertaking display screen assessments. And I'm going to ask Jane to talk about that, because you had fun, didn't you, with Ben? Yeah.
So I think one of the things to highlight about that was I think Ben was instrumental. So he was the physio, the student that went on placement. He was instrumental in designing what a student placement would look like. So if you don't necessarily know exactly how it will look like, the student, part of their role can be to help develop that as a placement going forward. So because we'd all been working at the university and then we're all working at home, Ben's idea was that he could do a display screen equipment or workstation assessment with all of the staff that had moved from the university to home, and it was absolutely brilliant. Like, I had to take a picture of my workstation and where I work, and he looked at it, and then we had a Teams meeting where he gave me loads of advice, and he pointed me in loads of directions of like wellness support and things that the university offered that I wasn't previously aware of. So I think the thing to highlight there was he was instrumental in the design of the placement. So I think they had a few ideas, but it wasn't a finished product when he kind of embarked on it. And we've had some really successful remote placements, haven't we? We've had quite a number of students placed with Connect. And then another really good example was a service at, I think it was Wrightington, where they'd gone from being a fully face-to-face service to being remote. And they were struggling with, the IT and getting their patients involved. So one of our students spent a lot of time with more elderly patients on calls with them, kind of supporting the patients to navigate the IT infrastructure, so that then they were kind of in place to have consultations with physiotherapists or with him as a physiotherapist. But he was kind of integral part of their team, really, in setting up a new virtual service that previously didn't exist.
So as I hope you both know, and I hope this doesn't get negated by my line of questioning that's going to come now, is for me to just sort of automatically flag some of the things that I think are obvious risks that come to mind for me, but also what I've heard from others, where these new innovations are completely appropriate for the time because they are, by definition, better than nothing. However, what I would say is that the instinct when people compare that to what would be classically defined as clinical education, they consider it to be a distant second best, and also that they would consider it to be a significant compromise from the actual act of doing. So, for example, although only one of many great examples, the fact that a student might support the tech and the liaison with a patient, there's going to be some gains that come with that. But relative to them helping to take to assess those same patients in a face-to-face MSK environment, for example, is very much, they're going to get what they did before, plus plenty of other things and plenty of other interactions. Now, there's an argument, of course, that this is the brave new world we face, and that realistically that is what many therapists are doing right now. But as we start to phase through, how much of the new normal should we retain, and how much of the old normal should we try to get back?
And I think that's a really good question that we've asked a lot. But I think some of this stuff is here to stay. I think we're going to be being more kind of offering more tech services in the future. And I think what we want to look at is giving our students a really well-rounded experience, that they will, throughout their placement journey while they're at university, get more of a balance. So I think it wouldn't be good if a student had purely leadership, tech, virtual placements and didn't do any face-to-face. But out of the 1,000 hours of placement that they have, we need to be much more innovative and creative and giving them opportunities, because not all of our students will ever work in the NHS. Some people might go straight into setting up a business on their own, or they might work for a private company, or they might work in Occy Health, or they might do something different. So we need to think outside the box, I think, and give them the skills to be able to go off and follow their dreams or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think it's our intention that absolutely not our intention that students would have all their placements in these innovative and zeitgeist ways. We recognise that students, the beating heart of physiotherapy is face to face with the patients, isn't it? That's what we all enter the profession to do. To work with our patients, and we recognise that is where students will glean those clinical skills and all of those professional and personal skills. But the whole landscape has changed, hasn't it, dramatically in the last 6 months, really. And our students need to be prepared to enter that brave new world. So we recognise that these types of placements have got a role. We're not saying it exclusively. What we try and think about with our students' placements is that they've had exposure to a wide range of placements, so different types of placement settings, different types of patient cohorts that they will work with, different age groups, different demographics, different types of clinical presentations. So we recognise, absolutely, we would maybe think that possibly our students currently do our undergrad students do 5 placements currently over their placement journey, 1,000 hours. We maybe think maybe a fifth of those hours could possibly take place in one of these, what you might describe as a role emerging placement. But the skills and knowledge and experience the students glean from them have got so much transferable application to other settings, really. So, yes, we recognise they've got the role, but we're certainly not about to dispense with our traditional face-to-face working as part of a team in a clinical setting type of placement at all.
Because what's the response been like from the students, considering the fact that they're in a situation where they're just wanting something? And how well do you think that reaction is going to translate to the future, whereby there might be a plethora of different options? How much are they going to be interested, do you think, in these role emerging, more innovative placements when the other things are back online?
I think they will be really interested in them. We actually trialled some role emerging placements in the summer of 2019 before we'd even thought of COVID or heard of COVID, and we ran those in the university. We paired up with two outside organisations. One was a community interest company that offered services for patients with quite severe dementia, and mainly day services, and the other was with a housing trust that offered an extra care facility for residents over the age of 55, so supported living. And neither of those services had previously had a physiotherapist involved in those services. And we worked with those teams to develop placements for our students. And we offered them out in a competitive way to our third year elective students. So we asked them to present a case as to why they should be considered for those placements. What did they think they were going to gain from those placements? What did they think that they could bring to those placements? And we were absolutely deluged with interest, because it's recognised it was an opportunity for them to shine, for them to use the skills and knowledge that they had, but also to be able to challenge themselves and do something different and show that they could innovate and, just take their practice to a new level, really. So they were really popular, and students fed back, and we took them to a conference, and they were really, really positive about those experiences. I don't think they felt that they had an inferior experience at all. I think they recognised all the added value that they got from those placements.
Because I can think of, and this is one of the challenges I think we face, is that when therapists that have been qualified 10 plus years now don't need to be that long, but just generally speak, people that have gone through a more traditional clinical education journey, which does vary across different schools, but they might well be considering, and that is the norm, right? That's the standard of which they're considering, and therefore any deviation from that would be somewhat compromised. Now, persuading them in some circumstances that that's enhanced is one thing, but also it's different, and them respecting that is going to be important as well. I can think of placements that I had in my student journey that I would happily replace with any of the things on that list. And then there are other ones that I'd be, if I can think of a parallel universe in which some of my best placements were replaced, I'd be more concerned. How are we going to manage the distribution of that in everyone's experiences?
We look very carefully at every student's individual placement profile. So we look individually at each. We've just actually got some software that places the students for us. Historically, myself and my colleagues have placed each individual. We know what we have available to us, and we place that student according to their learning needs and according to the experience that they've had. So each student has a bespoke placement journey. We've got this software that in place that can do some of the work for us, but it still needs some human intervention to ensure that students get a balanced journey. So we will still be, using our clinical knowledge, our knowledge of the student's journey, our academic knowledge, to ensure that students are getting a balanced range of placements across those 1,000 hours that they will have experienced working, for example, in the face-to-face MSK setting, that will have had an inpatient placement in an acute hospital setting, that they will have worked in the community, that they will have possibly done one of these more innovative types of placements, and we look at their individual journeys to make sure that they have accrued both what we might. We're moving away from this concept of core skills, but we know that there are some core skills and knowledge that are fundamental to being a physiotherapist, and we're guided by the standards of education and training from the HCPC and standards from the Chartered Society of Physiotherapy. So I don't think we're looking to deviate into the unknown. Students will still be grounded in those traditional values and skills and knowledge of physiotherapy, but we recognise that healthcare is changing and we have to respond to that and prepare our students to be able to work in this ever-changing environment.
And just to kind of elaborate on the example that Sophie gave with the kind of supported living environments, those students were kind of identifying potential frailty, potential social isolation, and they were kind of being innovative in putting in services, social things, exercise activities for those residents that hopefully will go on to prevent them from, having that fall and that hip fracture that then might kind of lead them down a spiral of needing more and more care. So they're putting all of their knowledge and skills that they've learned elsewhere into more of a preventative kind of environment. And we've done something similar with a local homeless charity in Manchester, trying to recognise why is it that homeless populations don't access traditional healthcare, and can we do something as a student population to start to kind of provide some support and some advice and some physio interventions to help a population that are vulnerable but don't access healthcare until they're really, really sick. And the students, like Sophie said, they get so much out of it, and they really have to think deeply about the clinical and academic experience they've had so far to develop almost these kind of services that don't exist. And I think it's like it massively enhances their student experience. It's absolutely in no way an inferior type of placement, I wouldn't think. And the communication and the listening skills that you learn in a telephone conversation, you have to really refine that. It's a lot more difficult, I think, in my limited experience of doing it, from a face-to-face conversation with a patient.
Yeah, no, there's certainly lots of devil's advocacy underneath a lot of my questions there with regards to the inference of it being inferior. However, it is a concern that people have, mainly because they will reflect on a difference between what they've experienced, especially when they've had a positive journey through their student time as well as their career. We see that occurring when people are sometimes carrying heavy judgment whether someone's done their rotations or not. Something that comes from that projection of their own experience. What I want to ask though is, and thank you to those that are dropping some comments in. Obviously, this is more conversational. I also noticed that my signal's a bit ropey, so apologies if I'm dropping in and out at all for anyone. But a question I have for you both is, I've got, as ever, 101 different ideas of ways in which we could potentially offer provisions for students in face-to-face virtual project management. I've got many plates spinning, of which I could maybe hand over to capable individuals, particularly if there was any sense of selection for any of those. But there is the challenge that to truly support them as you'd like to improve their learning experience and direct it to more specifically to their learning needs. The challenges that we would face in just management of that, and what I would put on me and my team to do that, sometimes makes people, including me, sort of tentative to do that, especially because it would, at least in the initial stages, especially with the teething, I think it would cost. Now you've got the opportunity that in time or done well, I can imagine it would almost bolster a workforce, get project round. And so I'm not meaning to take that answer away from you, but I almost want to account for that in my question and say, are there ways in which these things could be remunerated or appropriately rewarded for people that are going to be innovative in that direction?
I can't promise you handsome sums of money, Jack, for taking our students on placement. But there are ways and means that you can be. We recognise, we've had conversations with other private practitioners, particularly, that there is cost involved in stepping away from you managing your own patients and supervising physiotherapists, but student physiotherapists. But for example, at our movement unit in Manchester, they have offset some of that by offering services at vastly reduced cost. So you can have an assessment with one of our supervised student physiotherapists. There is a fee for that, but we recognise that we can offer that at a much less cost than it might be with one of our qualified members of staff. I mean, there are ways and means, but we do recognise that there is financial implication. There is financial cost to taking a student, particularly in private practice.
Because as an organisation, you are paid to educate those individuals, right?
Yes.
To a few different streams.
Yes.
Then, as we would then be collaborative educators, not just in terms of delivery, but now we're talking about in design as well. Almost it was sort of part of the motions and almost something that you grew up in a department when you were working, is that you'd seen it and experienced it as a student, then you were experiencing it as an observer, then as an educator. It became part of the culture. This would take for us to not just deliver, but design and co-design.
Yeah.
Now, that's the bit where I'm thinking that in time, although right now, of course, I'm not trying to put any sort of price tag on that. I'm just meaning that in time, if it was to be done properly, then me and my team would become integrated and overlapping with you and your teams.
Yes.
In such a way that I imagine that would be an appropriate and fair distribution of funds to educate those individuals, wouldn't it? That seems more fair.
Yeah, and we have had this conversation because the cost of students being on placement doesn't come from the university. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sophie. For English students, it comes from Health Education England. It's not the university. So, as a private provider, and I need to find out about how this works, but as a private provider, you can get those costs from Health Education England, but I'm sure it can take quite a long time to get those costs when you apply. And it's not probably the equivalent of what, do you know what I mean? It's not. I don't think it's a lot of money.
No.
And then for international students, there might be a slightly different pot of money in a different way round that. So that is separate from the money, the pot of money at the university that pays us to educate students. It comes from a different. The student placement costs come from somewhere different. Interestingly, though, I was part of the Mbisa conference over the last 2 days and did some work on placements around the world. And in Europe and in South Africa, obviously, most of their healthcare is privately funded. So they've been moving all of their students into private practice because of the issues of going into kind of hospitals over there. And they've kind of just offered services like somebody, if someone's paying for, say they have 6 sessions or whatever, or 3 sessions, they can have an extra couple of sessions for free with the student. So the student might be part of the clinician assessing and treating on the insurance because they haven't got insurance for a student, but then the student can carry on the care if the patient wants a few extra sessions for free. And I know that's not ideal, but it might be a little way around it. The other thing that's quite interesting is having more than one student. So the students can have a lot of peer support. So it almost takes the onus off the supervisor to be constantly supervising the student. They can at some point kind of supervise each other and peer support each other when you don't have time available to spend with them. And, potentially like a more experienced student could mentor a less experienced student at the same time, if that sort of makes sense. I know it's not ideal, but there's kind of ways of thinking around it a little bit.
I'd say that can be quite developmental for a student, though, can't it? To develop another student, that peer learning. And I think it's recognising as well that not every hour with the student has to be patient facing. They can take time out. They can actually help you, as we described with our student who did the remote placement, in designing that placement themselves. How can they scope it out, really? We recognise there are costs, and there are streams of money, as Jane has said, from individual students at HE. But the students can actually be instrumental themselves in co-producing those placements.
I think one of the things there is that I can see several mechanisms in which it would be easier in time. Once you'd set the framework, you could almost have projects that can be handed through.
Absolutely.
And that more placements will only make more efficiency, and therefore in time could also be the route to which you're then bolstering, as I said, your project workforce within services as we get back to normal. Everyone's
and actually boosting your own service as well.
We're all adjusting
what you offer as a provider.
And often innovative, and they're often thinking in that direction already within their own work. Can sometimes be great to bring fresh faces in. Now, you've been appropriately persuasive to me. I hope you have to others. Many more people tune in after the fact than live. I'm just going to bring up a couple of comments. A lovely one here from Gemma. She said, "We need to help the future of our profession, or we won't have a profession to develop." In conclusion of several comments you've made there. So thanks, Gemma. Others there that are less decent, especially this one, is a word of warning. in case we were to develop the future, the Jack Chews of the future. That definitely concerns me. But
no, I think you'd be a great role model, Jack.
Let's not pretend that'd be a good idea. But thank you so much to both of you for your time. Sorry, we're going to wrap up now. Just because of time, I try and keep to time, just because people like to accuse me of waffling. But yeah, I hope that's been useful for all of you. We'll definitely be discussing this again, and I might rope you into another conversation as things develop and when we've got more and more examples. So
Brilliant.
thank you so much for all that you're doing. If all going well, what we will have now is a flash of the outro graphic as we wave goodbye. And if that doesn't work, I do apologise. But thanks again, and we'll speak to you soon.
Thank
you
you
very much. Thank you for having us.